Oh my gosh. Hi.
How's it going?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
There you go. I'm appearing on the screen.
I don't know. That's weird.
I know, right? I'm so nervous right now.
Give me a second. I'm gonna try getting.
Oh shit. Did I just um 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 I think I just kicked you out by accident and I didn't mean to. Sorry, Heidi. Here she is. Hi. Hang on a minute, I've got to unmute you. You've muted yourself. There you go.
There we go.
There you go, you're live. Hi.
Hey, hi.
Oh my
Nice to
gosh.
finally
Hi
meet
guys,
you.
how are you?
I'm not too bad, you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah. It's good to know. I mean, really thank you for doing this, by the way. I mean, we've got a few people that wanted to join, but they obviously other life things happen. But yeah, it's been good to like be able to do this though. Thank you. They've got their questions. I think Heidi's got a couple as well. So
Sure.
yeah, I'm letting it. She's making me laugh at the camera at the minute. Hang on.
In a meeting. So, all right. I'm find my questions. So, Aaron, basically, we just want you to tell us like a bit more, like about like how you started, a bit more like about yourself, what got you started into like writing.
Yeah, so writing was always a very early passion for me. I knew from really the age of 5 that, there was some kind of special ability that I had in terms of being able to create, maybe not writing at first, but just to create in general, because, I would be so prone to collecting cardboard that my parents would bring home, and I'd cut it up and put it together and make like little inventions out of it, and always just trying to invent and make something new. And there was something about sharing my work with other people that was extremely appealing to me. And I think that's kind of what led me to start writing down my ideas, my thoughts, and that kind of took shape into writing. I don't really know if there was one defining moment when I was like, writing is going to be, this thing that I'm going to give a little bit more effort into. But I really started off writing picture books. So what I would do is I would sneak into my parents' bedroom and I would steal 8.5 by 11 paper out of our printer, and I would go ahead and staple them together. Write like 3 to 4 words on each page, make them into little books, and I would hand them out at family parties. I would give them to friends at school or daycare. I would even give them out like at garage sales, like to people in the neighborhood. I mean, a number of things. And I guess that was kind of really one of those beginning steps for me to pursue the writing publisher route. But from a very early on point, I knew that I had kind of this special gift, where I could take my words and string them together, into a way that entertained people. And my parents very well knew that as well. And they did everything in their power, at least aside from a variety of other negative factors that impacted my childhood. They did everything they could to nurture that gift per se, to give me the best chance possible. And, obviously every, hand that helped me along the way, was obviously, a great help, in various ways. So whether that it was positive or negative, that it affected me. But yeah, no, I mean, and I really think that people with, extraordinary abilities, like they start to show those very early on, when they're young, just getting going in life. And, you know, I really felt it early on in a certain way that, like I said, wasn't really maybe centered around writing at first, but, you know, it was centered around creating something, creating stuff in general. And, you know, that's really kind of where it took off. So.
Okay, so it's because one of the questions we have is like, how do you deal with both like the positive and the negative like feedback you get or criticisms you get? How do you take that to?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I, as a writer, have struggled with for a very long time. It's not something that can really be taught to anyone and how to deal with that. It's kind of something that almost you have to wear yourself down a little bit. You know, you're just like this big rock, and you know, there's all this water passing over you, and over time, it's just eroding and kind of, you know, making you more desensitized, you know, to negative feedback. And that's kind of what has happened with me for many years now. But I still, you know, I mean, there's different points, even when, you know, I get, you know, heated about different criticism, you know, as would any creator, you know. But I remember what it was like, you know, when I published my first book, you know, at like 15, or even before that, when I was just sharing my work with other people, and even beyond that, after I really started to get going and started to establish my presence, you know, as Aaron Ozee, you know. And I really think that, you know, dealing with criticism, you know, is one of the harder things that you can master as a writer, as a creator in general. And, you know, mainly the way that I have dealt with it is, you know, I kind of came to learn from a number of other authors, you know, a number of other public figures, you know, and really just kind of through my own self-reflection that, um, asking the opinion in general, asking the opinion of another author what they think of your writing is probably not the best idea. So, because the reason being is that, you know, they're always going to, and deep down, really think that their writing is more genuine, you know, more, you know, special than yours is, you know, whether they like to admit it or not, you know. And so it's not always the best to really seek, you know, that comfort from other creators, because you as a creator yourself should be able to give yourself that push, that confidence, you know. And that's really where it lies in, you know, other than people just telling you to be confident. I mean, it's a very different thing. And, you know, really for me, you know, in dealing with, you know, the different criticisms that I've had, you know, I have kind of really developed this idea that not everyone is going to love what you do. Everyone is going to have their own opinions, and not everyone is going to agree with what you're doing, you know. And so, and that's fine, you know, and that's okay. I mean, but think the part that you should really be focusing on is, you know, the people that you are impacting positively, you know, the people that you are entertaining, you know, not the people who are naysayers and, you know, just doing everything they can to bombard your hard work, you know. And another perspective, I guess, that I've used over time, because there's been a myriad of them, you know, but one of them I've also used has been, you know, has this person who's saying negative things about my work or me, have they ever, you know, spent money, you know, to buy my book or to watch my movie or to come to my events or anything like that, or to endorse me on social media? You know, have they done any of those things, you know? And if the answer is no, you know, and if I'm putting all these, you know, different indicators together and the answer is still no, you know, then I'm like, well, then why should I give them the time of day? Because, you know, obviously they're not even remotely invested in my work enough, you know, to the point where, you know, they can even make a sound judgment on what they're seeing, you know, what they're experiencing when, you know, they're being exposed to my creative work. So, but I don't think it's really centered around like one specific strategy that you have in order to deal with criticisms. I just feel like over time, you know, there's been a new perspective, you know, every so often that comes to light. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. You know, it gives me a little bit more comfort to deal with a lot of that negativity coming my way. But I think it's good to have multiple strategies, multiple techniques, multiple coping strategies to deal with that negativity, because it really can be discouraging. Like a great example would be when I published my first book, Celestial Inferno, Poems of Another Realm, when I was 15 years old and sophomore in high school. And, I remember literally to this day, the first day that it went live online, I think it was, like the first or second day that it was out there on lulu.com, which is my publisher's site. And it was just only in their site at the time. And I had noticed, I was like, oh man, I'm like, it was not even like a day after I published it, and there was already a review. And the review, it was one of the worst reviews that I have ever gotten still to this day as an author. And I could not believe what this person said about my work. And it was just so uncalled for, the language they were using. Profanity was being used as well. And that was kind of my earliest encounter with, what most would, classify as like an internet troll. It was someone who deliberately went out of their way to attack me, to attack my work. And, so from a very early on, in my career, I really experienced, how violent fans can get, when they don't agree with the content that you're putting out there. And as a young lad at the time, I was still, very much in shock by that, because, I took it very personally rather than like more on the business front, and now if I get feedback like that, I'm like, obviously I use these different strategies that I'm talking about to steer around that. So if that kind of answers your question. So.
You got another one, Heidi, or should I go in?
Yeah, you can do that.
My internet's going a bit funny, just warning now. Talking about like criticism and like everything about other people reading and stuff like that, there's a question from one of our writers called Frost, who is in our RP side of things. And he goes, are there any ideas that you've had to hold back on before because you didn't want to write them out, but it wasn't because you didn't want to write them, it's more of the case that there was other reasons that you decided not to do it?
Yes and no. Really for me, whenever I felt like writing, anything, I've just done it. If it's the right time, if it's the right place, it just kind of naturally comes out. But have there been certain ideas that I haven't explored at a specific time because of, I don't know, like focus on other projects, or, lack of interest, or lack of resources to get started? Yeah, absolutely. There definitely has been instances like that. I think an ongoing struggle for me, and, this is something that, I really don't widely talk about, as much, but, not in a negative sense, but it's just, never really comes up. But a side project that I've been working on for several years now has been trying to partner with another author who could basically write my life story, to write really a version of my earlier life, me getting started as an author, getting up to this point, having become a bestseller, gotten world records, all the celebrity attention interviews, and, going into Regulus and that being like the crown jewel and all that, just really trying to detail that story, as more of this motivational, educational piece. And, there's been 4 different authors that I have partnered with where the partnership has fallen through for, a variety of like grave circumstances. Like, and for instance, like, one of the authors I was working with, they developed like a fatal disease, while I was working with them, and they had to stop. Another one had to move across the country and couldn't handle it anymore. Someone was actually scamming me at a point, and that ended very badly. And so there was a number of very horrible encounters on that front, but it didn't discourage me. If anything, it really encouraged me to work harder at it. And unfortunately, my first few times that I was working on it with the first few authors, stupid me, I didn't take enough time to write down my thoughts. Like, I was doing interviews with them, like I would jump on Skype, or have them come in person, and I'd share all this information, and they do all these recordings, take all these notes. And in any of those situations, like if we parted ways or they had to stop working on it, there'd always be some kind of excuse that would come up, like, oh, like my computer died, or oh, I lost these files, or oh, like I don't have those notes anymore, I got rid of them. And it was always this dead end. So like the most recent time, I guess you can say, that I worked on it was probably about 3 years ago. And it was really, kind of, I maybe even less than that. It was kind of really at the start of the pandemic. Like there was a lot of work going on with that. And the author that I was working with, I finally decided to go out of my way and actually type up a lot of the different things that I was sharing with him. And even though, obviously, historically, even though the most recent time didn't work out, I still had a lot of that material where I was able to share that with like other people interviewing me or other projects that I'm working on, where, there really needs to be in-depth knowledge about like my personal background, so it really all served a purpose at the end of the day, but, you kind of, in regards to your question though, it's really about picking and choosing your battles and prioritizing your projects, and, I'll say that, you should never be afraid to just go out and write something, even if you think that, oh, like it's a sensitive time, or, I don't know if like you can emotionally handle writing something like that. I think you should just do it anyway, because if there's any kind of sudden doubt that you have, in a moment when you're trying to write something, you're like, ooh, I don't know if I should write it, because that you should be more compelled to write it in that instance, because that's your mind telling you that there's a lot of context there and it needs to be shared in a written format, and you just need to get it out, and that's some of the best writing that I've ever produced, is when I've been in very severe situations, horrific situations, happy situations, but, in times when I didn't really envision that I would be writing a particular something, and I did, because I pushed myself to do it. And in almost every instance, it was very successful, but then there's the other side too, that, if there's not really an opportune moment in your career to actually start working on a specific project, or, if something that you've worked on previously hasn't really worked out, and you're trying to find a way to make time for it and bring it to light again, you kind of have to prioritize what you have currently going on. So I think there's both sides there to consider, as you go into that. So if that makes sense. But
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Actually, that was a really good answer. His second question was, if you don't bother looking at the books and sales numbers, what book are you the most proud of having written?
I'll say this: success really should not be confined by, the amount of money being made. It should be, the value, the contribution of those efforts, what it's doing, with the change that it's creating, and even though I have, achieved, a professional and financial success like no other, and, I'm super grateful for everything that has happened, I am more proud of what my work has been able to do to people, do to readers, fans everywhere, versus the amount of, or the percentage of royalties that I'm earning, across the board, because that's not why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's not why I did this in the first place many years ago. But in general, though, out of all my work at this point, my most known is Regulus. If Regulus did not come down the pipeline, I don't know. I don't think it's a question of if I would have succeeded in all the ways that I have, but I think it's when I would have succeeded in all the ways that I have. Because remember, Regulus is my 11th book, so it took me 10 tries before that to figure it out and get to a point where I could produce something that was extremely noteworthy. And, I've told you this before, is that for many years, I have, I really focused my attention on poetry, because through testing like my hand at like short stories, novels, plays, that kind of all led me to start working on poetry, and I really wanted to make a name for myself as this new age, popular 21st century poet kind of thing, and I was trying to really create that as a brand, and it was working, but it was gradually growing. And, I felt like the progress being made wasn't substantial enough. And even like, it made me less marketable. And I knew that if I were to expand and, I had to really grow my brand, grow my skill set, just grow everything, instead of just, staying where I was at, and kind of holding myself back or dying off altogether, I needed to do something a little bit more mainstream, I guess you can call it. But it wasn't really something that I went into thinking like, oh, like I'm going to go ahead and write a children's book now. It was one day, I was sitting around and saw, hey, this poem that I just wrote, I can see this as being an illustrated story, a children's book, if you call it, and that's kind of really what allowed me to do that. So it was that simple of a choice to make that, to change direction, head that way. But, the impact that, Regulus has had and what it continues to have, and what it continues to do for my brand, as Aaron Ozee, it's unbelievable to see the size of the footprint that the book and everything that has come from this so-called Regulus verse, has produced, the lasting change that it's created. And, it's kind of funny in certain ways too, for me, that the fandom, the audience that this book, this concept has attracted has grown into much more than being something for children or for families. It's turned into something that adults really love too. And these are not adults that read it as they were children and then grew up and they're like, hey, I remember that. No, I'm talking about adults here and now, in modern day. And, it's really fun and engaging to see how attracted these adults get, to the story, because, at the same time that I marketed the book, marketed the whole Regulus brand for children, for families, like really the target audience, I also simultaneously, through myself, aka why I'm now wearing that yellow suit, because it's its own marketing function in itself, through that, I think ultimately the yellow suit and also releasing the Regulus movie, those two elements were really the two things that really started to make my image more appealing to adults. And, because you got to think, really, as much as I would want to format my content, for families, for children, who are the decision makers? It's the adults, right? And so that's really who you should be going after, because they have the money. They're making the decisions, they're deciding, what books they're going to buy for their children, buy for their family, and so you really have to play all cards at that point. So I'm just really fortunate to see how a lot of that has progressed. But from everything as a whole, from the change that it's created, from the sales that it's produced, everything overall, Regulus is really that, defining moment for me. And ever since 2017, like really ever since that book was published, it's just, it's truly incredible to see how far this journey has come. So
That's actually really a good answer. Like, I bet you he's going to appreciate that. He told me he was working today. He's like, I'm going to miss it. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll answer your question for you. So
sure.
One of the other questions is from Terralax. Another question is, how do you deal with like writer's block? Like you have an idea, but you're not sure, like, how to purvey it, like, so to see, or how to get those thoughts out. Like, how do you, like,
okay. Yeah, so great question. So I get asked about writer's block a lot. If there's one question that's really kind of at the top of that totem pole, of questions, it's that, and my answer is somewhat confusing, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think if you really reflect on it, I think it will make sense to everybody too. And because it's not really the traditional answer that you'd hear for writer's block. You'd see a lot of writers come to you and say, well, you need to, maybe follow a couple of prompts, maybe write down a couple of words, that really resonate with how you're feeling, and, test out a couple of different, ideas that you're having, kind of think through it a little bit, and that's definitely, like a more mechanical approach, to organizing your thoughts and ideas, to get to a good point where you can overcome that blockage. That's definitely a strategy, but it's probably not the best approach, because when I have found myself in situations of writer's block, my first instinct is to actually get up and walk away, and is to stop writing altogether, because that's your mind telling you that you are not in a good place to work on whatever you're working on, or the idea, like that the idea that's going to lead you to take that next step isn't formulated yet, and it's going to take time, at maybe not a lot of time, in most cases it's really not a lot of time, but it all depends on what you do in that moment away that counts. That's really what's going to determine how fast you get to a good point where you can pick up again. And really what I do, there's a number of things that I'll do. Like I'll sit and listen in pure silence, like classical music, nothing else around me. I'll sit and I'll watch the fireplace. I'll sometimes go to the bar and grab a drink and kind of just sit there and, stare off and reflect on my thoughts, or, work out even, or sit and look at nature, or different art pieces or sculptures that I have, like that are like little creative, ottomans, and I think that a lot of that, has really helped me to just kind of detach my focus from the creative work at hand. And as I'm doing these other activities, there's a moment where, it hits me and I'm like, wow, like, hey, maybe that's an interesting way to kind of get around it. And it always comes to me in that sense, but there's a sense in disconnecting to reconnect, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the way I explain it to most people. And that strategy doesn't always work for most people, I mean, it certainly, it doesn't always work, but and sometimes maybe it has to be more mechanical, like you're sitting there and just pressuring yourself and writing things out until something comes, and that's, I'm guilty of that too. I have done that before, but in terms of the different strategies that I've used, I feel like this is more effective. So.
And also, this is one from Kira, like what sources or experiences do you have sort of been ideas to get you into writing or writing something, or maybe like a certain experience happens and then you're like, okay, maybe this might be a good idea for another, I don't know, story or whatnot, or another piece of writing that like I can do.
Like what do you mean exactly? Can you explain a little more?
More like, do you sometimes, like, let's say a past experience, or let's say you're watching something like a show or something, you're like, okay, this might be a good idea for like a future project, or like this, like general, like life in general, like is there certain experiences you sometimes draw on, or sources that you draw on when you're...
Yeah, well, I think that answer is kind of twofold. One is people always, a common question that I get is not how, but where do you come up with most of your ideas? Like, I guess what environmental factors influence your ideas? And I said, well,
like what certain things like have influenced you into...
Yeah. So, well, there's a basic answer and a more complex answer. So the basic answer is that there's really two places that I would say where I can be, where ideas flow the best. And I've never understood them. I've really tried to reflect on them and understand why that is, but I think there's definitely something behind it, and I'll kind of speak to what I think that might be. Because it's interesting to really dig down to the roots of where your creativity comes from. Because if you can, I mean, I've never really had to do that because it's always flowed so naturally for me. But like if I ever had trouble, that's definitely what I would do. I would really milk that down and figure out what the source is, and try to work with that source, to amplify it. sorry. The two places really that I come up with the best ideas are when I am either in the bathroom or when I am driving. And I don't know why that is. It's just very odd, but that it just happens that way. And that's fine, wherever the ideas come, they come, but, and it doesn't even matter the time of day, morning, midday, evening, if I'm driving in the bathroom, something comes to light. And, it's kind of a wild thing, but, I think everyone has their own little outlet for, has their own little outlet for coming up with ideas, different places where they can be, I've heard other people, it's going camping or going on a walk or, hanging out with family or, going to the bar, I mean, there's so many things that people do to get inspired, that it just kind of happens that way. But in terms of like past experiences or anything that I draw on, to really give me, further creative influence, I don't think there's really anything in particular that I draw on in that sense, because I'll say this, as you have this gift of creativity, this gift of writing, there's an element where you don't know where the magic comes from. That's why it's magic, right? And it just kind of happens at different points. It just kind of naturally occurs with me. Like I know for a matter of fact, like no matter how long, like if I took a break from writing, no matter how long I took that break for, what I was doing or what shift in career I made, away from writing, I know that any instance that I would go and try to write again, I would be able to write the same way, because it's like this gift that I was born with, and if you can rely on that fact, I mean, that's a very powerful thing, and so if that kind of answers your question, it just kind of comes from, different points in your life, it comes from a very special place, and sometimes that place is explained, and sometimes it's not. So, and that's kind of where I kind of draw that line. But, whatever that secret sauce is, I've definitely, found a way to, make it work to my advantage, and so can anyone else. So.
My last question also ties in with Kyra's last one that she was asking, because she was going to be here, but she had to go sort her daughter out. And my kind of ties in with me. I've been open and honest. I've got mental health issues, and obviously Kyra's asking basically whenever you come to writing everything, and obviously ignoring the critics, everything like that. But you always have that constant feeling of not being good enough, or you feel like you've written like the worst piece you could ever do, like a chapter of a book, for example. Do you have any small tips that you can do to try and help the mindset differentiate from that, so you don't always think of yourself as, I'm a terrible writer, I'm not being able to do this, I can't do that, sort of thing?
Yeah, no, and that's a really great question. And, I have experienced, and I still to this day experience with a variety of, mental health issues. I mean, that's a really common and prevalent thing in our world today, and there's still not enough awareness around it. I mean, shame on like literally everybody, because, we need to really be more in tune with what's going on, because, especially following the pandemic, I mean, it's a crazy how big that industry of like therapy and self-care and mental wellness has grown into, and it's still so expensive and, unaffordable, and especially being here, like in the US, like it's very hard to come by. I mean, you're spending an arm and a leg, on, just getting care, and it just feels like, yeah, you're scamming me in many ways, and you're profiting off of my misery, and it's kind of hard to overcome those thoughts, but, still, nonetheless, it's a necessary need, so, but aside from that, though, I think dealing with, I guess, like, self-motivation, is a very tricky thing, because, it depends on how you deal with, that doubt, with that, with, I don't know, I guess that self-imposed failure that really counts, and you kind of have to step out of this reactive, mode, and, think like, okay, well, I obviously, yes, like I'm being hard on myself here, or like I'm trying to push myself to create the best thing possible. Like, and I know I'm better than this. Like, I know I can do better. Like, I think that's like, it's that drive that like really gives you that frustration, because like your mind is like, okay, well, give me a minute to figure out what the next step is. And your ambition is pushing on that so hard and so fast, being like, go, 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 go. And that friction, that conflict that's created there, it's like so palpable that it's hard to reduce that and get rid of that, like at least naturally on its own. You almost like seek affirmation to get over that hump, right? You need someone to really come to you and be like, yes, it's going to be okay, like don't worry about it. And writers, they have very lonely lives, I would just say what it is, and most times we don't have someone sitting next to us who can give us that information. So either we turn schizophrenic entirely and use our characters to give us that information, which I've seen different authors do. And, or we just kind of, really step out of our own ego, our own, dwelling there and say, okay, how can I logically go about this? And I think probably one of the best ways is that, like, is this in my control? Like, did you lose your thought right now, your thought process, or did you lose track of that idea? Because that's your fault? No, that's not your fault. You don't know where it went, but you're going to get it back. Like, I lose my train of thought all the time. Like, I cannot tell you how many conversations I have with people where I'm like, what was I saying? And I have people like, share it with me, just because through many years and doing what I've been doing, my mind is like scattered all over the place, and it's hard to keep track of things, and it's hard to sometimes maintain focus, so I really have to work hard at it, and a lot of that has really just come from, training myself to be a good public speaker, but sometimes you really kind of just have to, push yourself, in a way where you can remain motivated about what you're working on, but at the same time, know when to stop, as I was saying before, and disconnect and then come back to what you're working on. But the immediate go-to effect, like in beating yourself up, in most cases, it's unavoidable. Like, there's no way that you can really stop that from happening. But what you can do is have the right coping mechanism in place to deal with that when that feeling comes to light. And the more you employ that coping mechanism and the more you advance that coping mechanism over time, it's going to feel so automatic, so, mechanic, that you're not going to even have anything to do with it. It's just going to be that way. And so I think that's probably the better answer that I can give to that, because I experienced that all too much, and it's very difficult at times to deal with that. But you just kind of have to push through it yourself, because at the end of the day, no one's going to make things right except yourself, and that's the hard fact growing up that a lot of people don't embrace. But as you grow older and you start to really feel the cruelness that life has to offer, you kind of start to, sense that level of independence. So
That's great. Thank you for answering those for me as well. Sorry, I was just checking if
yeah.
I got anything else. I don't think so.
Mm.
People been messaging me at the same time.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I mean, this is personally for me, it's been really helpful, because I like talking with other writers, because that's something I've been wanting to hopefully get into, is like, getting sort of like publishing or getting my own writing, because I've only done like the same. I've done like fan fiction for years, but it's been really difficult, I guess, trying to see if I'm really good enough to get myself out there. So, and I think that's
Yeah.
always been helpful for a lot of us, is because even when we're doing like art, like like fan fiction or just writing in general, it's just tough trying to get your thoughts and how. And I find sometimes too, getting advice or asking questions is really the best way to sort of see if you're good out there, or how to get yourself motivated.
Right. No, I totally agree. And talking with other writers, other creators in general is very, inspiring, and, it gives me, that support that I need to overcome different challenges, because even though our job, our passion is to create, we're not this, never ending faucet, that doesn't have a limit. We do have a limit. And sometimes in order to replenish that energy, we need to confer with other people who are experiencing the same things that we are, and it just makes sense. It's all about community, right? So, we're all here for each other. So I'm really glad that you guys were able to bring me on today. I know we kind of had the scheduling conflict before, but I'm glad we were able
Yes,
to make
yeah, I
that work
apologize
today.
about that.
So yeah, no worries. But I know we have like 30 seconds on the clock here though. But if you have any other questions come up, just feel free to let me know. And,
We'll definitely
always
get in
very
touch.
open. Yeah,
Yeah.
very open
Yeah.
to continually participating in your community and being a resource to you guys. This
Thank
is
you
really
so
helpful
much.
for me to connect with you guys, and any help that I can give. I always say if there's just one person in the room that can take what I'm saying and consider it to be valuable and apply it, then that's a win. So